The Twisted Lens, Episode 6, the Emergencies Act. The Emergencies Act was invoked in February in response to the so-called Truckers Protest in Ottawa. For context, it has never been invoked in Canada before, never. Its predecessor was called the War Measures Act, and it was similar to what was also called the National Emergencies Act in the US, and it was only used 3 times in response to World War I and II and to the so-called October Crisis of 1970. These measures involve the most sweeping powers elected officials can give themselves, stripping away all the legal rights of regular citizens. And yet we agreed to this without so much as a whimper. Now, sure, some will say, well, they have nothing to hide, so, the invasiveness of the Emergencies Act, well, that shouldn't be a problem. I will strongly disagree. We might need to twist the lens and look at the Emergencies Act in a whole new context. The Act is meant to have a very high standard and can only be used if a situation can't be resolved by existing federal law. Because once invoked, anyone can be arrested without cause, bank accounts frozen indefinitely with no legal recourse, valid insurance policies canceled, and all personal information, including sensitive medical records, can be shared with the RCMP or with CSIS. Even convicted felons seldom have their bank accounts frozen, and personal records, well, they cannot be shared. There is something very, very wrong with what happened here. And it gets worse. If only suspected of a crime under the Act, there is no presumption of innocence and no due process. I can be jailed indefinitely with no chance of ever getting my records back or my privacy returned. This didn't happen in China or Russia or North Korea. This happened in Ontario. As a quick aside, I have banned the word government from my vocabulary, at least in the context that it's generally used. And I'm going to challenge you to do the same. And here's why. Because there is no government. You and I, well, we're the government. We elect people to create laws that presumably we want in return for being paid with our tax dollars. It's an easy throwaway to blame the government for so many things, and yet I sound foolish because I'm only blaming myself. Hold that thought. You don't have to agree with the truckers' protest or any protest. That's not the point of today. The question is, did we reach the stage of a real emergency, the threshold? Could the rogue protesters not have been arrested and trucks towed away using current federal laws? Of course they could. Now with bank accounts frozen, all their personal information in the hands of the authorities, and no insurance on their vehicles, these folks are facing potential ruin. By contrast, in February 2020, a First Nations group, well, they blocked the Trans-Canada Railway, not just a single border crossing. National trade was halted, tourism disrupted, billions in goods affected, and hundreds laid off. Despite court injunctions, only a handful of arrests were made and no Emergency Act was invoked. Now, I support the right of anyone to protest peacefully. That said, I'm not a big fan of blocking borders or railways, but certainly believe that the Emergencies Act was not necessary in either case. It was a gross misuse of power. Here's the thing. I could be next to feel the wrath, swept up under the Act, just for exercising my legal right to civil disobedience or even for contributing money to a cause. And if I'm just a whistleblower, trying to do the right thing, we learned from Snowden and from WikiLeaks that it's considered illegal to report the illegal acts of our elected representatives who we allow to create laws to protect themselves. What is going on here? Finally, this is not a political rant. We, the government, did this. We approved this abuse of power. And I rarely say it, but I was embarrassed to be a Canadian. We, the people, indeed.